Hello, and welcome to Stream of Conscience, brought to you by Democracy for America. I'm your host, John Hartwell. Our guest today is Jonathan Steinberg, Democratic State Representative from District 136 in Westport. In Hartford, Jonathan sits on 3 committees: Transportation, Energy and Technology, and Aging. He's here today, however, to talk about a local project that's near and dear to his heart, bringing a movie theater back to Westport. John, welcome back to Stream of Conscience.
It's great to be back.
So, prior to going to Hartford, you were the deputy moderator of the RTM and also chair of a subcommittee on the downtown plan implementation. And in that role, you spearheaded an ad hoc group that's trying to bring a movie theater back to Westport. And I think we used to have several.
When I was growing up in Westport many years ago, we actually had 4 movie theaters just in downtown alone, and 5 overall.
Wow.
It was an embarrassment of riches that I think we all took for granted until the last one disappeared in 1999. In each case, it was because the real estate owner was able to get even higher rents from chain stores, and it became an expensive proposition. It was also the age in which the cineplexes, the multiplexes, were starting to spring up. So the entire model changed at that point in the game.
And where were these 4 in downtown?
Well, the Fun Arts One, which really dates back, I think, almost 100 years, is where Restoration Hardware is now, right on Main Street.
Okay.
And it was a fine old theater, maybe not as fancy as some of the ones you've seen, but it served Westport very well for a long time.
And the others?
One is where Matsu Sushi, the sushi place, is right now.
Okay.
The third is in the same complex where the Michelle's Pies are right now.
Right.
I'm trying to remember exactly where the 4th one is. I think it's sort of near where Tiffany is.
Okay. But 4 of them all in downtown.
Yes, they were small screens, but we had one dedicated almost exclusively to foreign films and art films.
Well, of course.
Yes, it's Westport.
Westport has a long artistic history.
Yes.
So the last one disappeared in 1999, and now if someone in Westport wants to go to the movies, they either, for an art film, they go to the Garden Cinema, perhaps in Norwalk, or for a second-run film, they go to the Community Theater in Fairfield. Those are the 2 closest.
Well, they used to. Now that one's shutting down, apparently.
That's going to shut down?
Yeah, I just read about that.
I didn't know that. That's too bad. And then, of course, there's the Cineplexes in Bridgeport and everywhere else. So what is it that you want to do?
When the Planning and Zoning Commission put together the 2007 Plan of Conservation and Development, which you have to do by state statute every 10 years, they also did a survey. They asked consumers, taxpayers, some basic questions like what they'd like to see happen in Westport. And they devoted a chapter specifically to downtown. And the request that came through loud and clear, perhaps more than anything else, with regard to downtown was a movie theater. And when I was assigned as an RTM representative to the Town Plan Implementation Committee that was called for by the Town Plan, I volunteered to chair a subcommittee focused exclusively on downtown. And we spent over 2 years deliberating. Obviously, the idea of a movie theater was incorporated into our recommendations. But I decided rather than just talk about what we needed to change, perhaps I, as a citizen, could do something about it. So along with Sandy Lefkowitz, who's my partner in crime, we started a series of meetings with townspeople from all sorts of walks of life and eventually created the Westport Cinema Initiative, a 501c3 not-for-profit dedicated to the proposition of realizing that dream on behalf of Westporters, bringing a cinema back to Westport.
And where do your plans stand now?
Well, we've made a lot of progress in a little over a year's time. We did our research initially. We came to the conclusion that it would be virtually impossible for us to expect to become a first-run movie theater.
Right.
Basically, the distributors have plenty of options in a fairly small area. So we really focused on the community cinema model, which is a membership-supported model. It's not predicated on covering your entire operating expenses exclusively based on ticket sales and concessions, but being supported by the community. And we felt very strongly that Westport was the kind of community, as you mentioned, with its long arts heritage of support, that we could count on to support an initiative of this type as well. So we've been through quite a bit. We've staged a number of screenings now, everything from some first-run films to some revivals. We just had an interesting screening of Animal House with the producer of the film,
Really?
Maddie Simmons, who told us probably some stories that most of us hadn't heard about John Belushi coming over to his house in Westport and some of the crazy things that went into the making of the film, and also an insight into the founding of National Lampoon magazine, in which he was also involved. An interesting slice of history.
It's extraordinary how many different strands of history come back to Westport.
It is, and we're counting on that as well. We're hoping that we're going to do more than show films you might actually be able to see in your home theater, but bring in actors and directors and producers to create more of an event, an opportunity for people to share their love of film and find out things they might not just by watching the film in the theater. That's really the concept.
It sounds a little bit like the Avon Theatre down in Stamford.
Very much so.
They are subscription-based. You can buy a regular ticket, or you can be a member and get a discounted rate, and then they have special events with filmmakers and all kinds of things. But they also run they run obviously first-run movies as well, because they have what was a huge cinema that's been chopped in two, as so many have. So there's a downstairs and an upstairs, a smaller cinema upstairs. But they're running first-run cinemas. But you're not thinking to run first-run.
Well, the Avon actually offers a wide variety. They're in a stronger position, as you say. They have an existing facility. They've been around for quite a while.
Right.
They've actually been very forthcoming. They've shared some of their insights on how to run a successful community cinema. They're kind of a hybrid. So they're very similar to what we have in mind. Member supported, a lot of events, a lot of special kind of one-off screenings and the like. They do have the advantage of having a cinema that they can a space they can occupy,
right.
And many community cinemas have that advantage. We're arguing that our advantage, at least, is when we find a site and we're able to work out the details, we will hopefully have a state-of-the-art theater from the ground up. It'll be small. We're talking about a total of maybe 200 seats. With 2 or 3 screens, maybe one cinema about 100 people, and then the smaller screens maybe 50 each. But that's really the model that we're looking for. We're not looking to fill hundreds and hundreds of seats, but we're going to basically be able to show a variety of films and have some flexibility in how we show them.
Do you have a business plan to back this up? Because
Absolutely.
It seems to me 50-seat theater, while it would be wonderful in terms of watching a film in a very intimate space, doesn't seem they would bring in a lot of revenue.
Well, as I said, basically the community cinema model presumes that you don't cover your entire operating nut from ticket sales or concessions.
Right.
We always expect to be member supported. We hope to raise enough money to create an endowment which may throw off some funds on an annual basis to cover some of our operating expenses. But we've also been very careful and watched how others have succeeded or failed to not overreach, to not expect to be able to fill hundreds of seats on a given night.
Right.
We realize we are an alternative entertainment option.
Right.
And therefore we're predicating our plans based upon modest and we think very reasonable expectations in terms of attendance. And it does work. It works in a lot of communities.
It does.
Yeah.
Are there other communities that we might know of that?
I think Bethel has a nice, very small theater in that regard.
It does.
And they're scattered all over the place. Each community's circumstances are unique in terms of how much competition they have, who they can draw from, the resources of their potential moviegoers. I think we're very fortunate in Westport because people have the wherewithal to go to the movies on a regular basis.
Right, and I'm sure that they do. So you mentioned when you find a facility, you're hoping that it seems to be purpose-built. Is
Yes.
that right? So how is that going to happen? Because now you're bringing in developers who are going to need to get a return on their money. So how does that work?
That's not exactly the model we have in mind.
Okay.
Our thought is, first of all, to be in downtown, because one of our goals is obviously to build community, but one of our other goals is to try to revitalize, if that's the right word, downtown, which gets kind of quiet at night. The retailers don't stay open. We don't have a lot of restaurants that choose to stay open. We think we can be part of a turnaround of sorts, even if it's a modest one. We create foot traffic. We'll have people on the street after hours, and perhaps those restaurants and stores may stay open a little bit later. But finding a location, given how well developed downtown is, has some limitations. We have a site in mind that would be wonderful. The last undeveloped piece of property in all of downtown is a little parking space, a dirt parking lot behind the restaurant Tavern on Main, and it's just the right size for us. About 7,000 square footprint, and we're only looking for about 6,500 square feet to put our side-by-side theaters. And we've been talking to the owner. there's a possibility, which we're hopeful, that he might contemplate gifting us the land and obviously realize a significant benefit from a tax purpose, particularly since the land might be valued at a higher value as a movie theater than it can be as it is currently, because the regulations limit what he can even do on it. So it's remained a parking lot all these years because there's very little that he can do.
Right.
And there are probably a couple of other locations that have existing structures, but they might be in our ballpark. We are hopeful to be able to minimize or eliminate the concept of having to pay rent every month, which would significantly reduce our operating expenses by entering in a relationship. We're looking for a partner in this who would view this as creating a legacy for Westport, something that they can look with pride. We'll obviously be glad to name the center after them, but the idea is they'd be doing something good for the community that would last a long time.
And did you give any consideration to spaces that already have projection possibilities built into them? And I'm thinking, for example, the library, the McManus Room, you can seat 150 people in there, I think, pretty comfortably, or the auditorium in Town Hall, which has everything you need and probably 400 or 500 seats.
Well, obviously we've considered all those things. In fact, in our nomadic existence of screenings, we've pretty much used all of these spaces. And to be fair, the library shows films on a regular basis themselves.
Right.
But I think they'd be the first to tell you that the McManus Room is not an ideal space. It doesn't have a canted floor. You have to really sort of cram in the chairs to get as high as 150. And certainly their projection and sound equipment are not up to the kind of standards that we would hope to be able to offer people on a night-by-night basis.
Right.
Now, the library has plans for a new facility.
Yes, it
and even then, they have plans for a performance space, but it would be a flexible space. Our goal is to have a dedicated space for movies. And that's the same issue with Town Hall, which has a lovely space in many ways, but we'd have to invest quite a bit to bring the sound system up to speed and the projection system. And there seem to be all sorts of town things going on during the week, which would limit our ability to show films.
Things like RTM meetings and P&Z meetings.
Which are certainly wonderful entertainments in and of
they
themselves.
Are,
and they're free, too.
They are.
But some people might not choose that as their first choice.
They might not. So what kind of budget are you working under?
As I said, we've talked to the Avon, we've talked to the Jacob Burns, which has a wonderful center in Pleasantville, New York. And we think we've got a budget that is roughly, and this is very rough, in the $500,000 range to operate. Which makes certain assumptions, and we would have a professional staff, but a lean staff. We do want to have a programmer or a curator, whatever you want to call it, who'd really be on the cutting edge to find out what kind of films are out there and try to secure some of them for us. And to do that, you need somebody who is a real professional, who's been doing that for a while.
Right, I was going to ask about that, whether you were going to hire professional staff. So you think that for $500,000 a year on running cost, you can make this work?
Roughly. It might be a little bit higher than that. That's the assumption. The most important thing that we can do is have conservative, modest expectations on what we might be able to bring in, and that we build the model according to that concept.
Right.
So if it was $600,000 or $700,000 and we could only generate, say, $450,000 from ticket sales and concessions, that's a couple $100,000 on an annual basis. We would need to raise from membership activities, sponsorships, which we would hope we would have, and maybe some throw off from an endowment.
Well, it sounds like it's a very ambitious plan. What's your your hope in terms of bringing this to fruition, where you would actually have a facility and a staff and a subscriber base? What's your projection?
My first reaction is we've come a very long ways in a short period of time. We've established our awareness, and we've assembled a wonderful team of volunteers. I want to knock on wood. I would think that we might be able to have a location secured, have our plans developed to the point where we could bring them before the Planning and Zoning Commission, requiring maybe a text amendment or certainly a special permit in some fashion. And we would have a site plan specific. That has to sort of wend its way through the system, and as we know, that can take a little bit of time. But it's not out of the question, say we should secure a site in the next few months, that we could be talking about putting a shovel in the ground in a year plus time. We'd like it to be sooner than later. There's a lot of pent-up demand to have a movie theater in town, and we're hoping it's not the kind of thing that has to wait 3 to 5 years to come to fruition.
Right. Now, you mentioned the text amendment at Planning and Zoning. And very recently there was such a text amendment, an overlay of the business district, as I understand it. They would have permitted this, but it ran into some opposition. Can you talk about that?
I think it falls under the category of no good deed goes unpunished. The Planning and Zoning Commission was very excited to see the recommendations of the subcommittee I mentioned earlier and to hear that the Westport Cinema Initiative was actually going to pursue that goal.
Right.
And they thought it would be nice if they could facilitate that outcome.
Okay.
So they created what they called a theater overlay zone over a good part of downtown, which would allow for a theater such as ours, and they stipulated that what would qualify under those terms to get started. The kinds of things they were talking about was perhaps an exemption from the required parking, which makes sense in our case because you could argue we're a complementary use. Most of our screenings would take place in the evening when there's less traffic downtown, so that makes sense. Perhaps an exemption from setbacks and certain coverage requirements, given there were a limited number of options in downtown. And then there was the controversial one, which again was put through by the subcommittee of planning and zoning with the best of intentions. The idea was, let's say we couldn't find a ground floor facility that we could build on or gut and work from there. Let's say we had to build on top of a one-story structure, of which there are any number in downtown Westport. And let's say that the footprint for that structure was such that we couldn't build two theaters side by side. We'd have to stack them. So they asked us, and we participated in the conversation, how tall would that be if you had two stacked theaters? And we told them. And they came up with an exemption that would allow us to go as high, or any theater in the zone, to go as high as 60 feet. Well, we never envisioned a 60-foot theater. It really wasn't something that would be something we'd look for in the first place. But that's what was on the books when this proposal came in front of the entire Planning and Zoning Commission. And there are those, I think with some good forethought, who wondered whether we needed a 60-foot structure in downtown Westport. Now,
which would be much higher than anything.
Not exactly, really. If you take what is now the new Gap building towards the northern end of Main Street, that's, I think, already over 50 feet when you take into account its parapet, which is actually a grandfather building that pre-existed much of the regulations in downtown. And some of the things that are being proposed for what was formerly is still, but will be formerly the Y facility in that area, could also go perhaps in excess of 50 feet. So it's a little unfair to say it would be an unprecedented height. But I understand that some believe that it would change the scale of downtown. And we've had, I think, an ongoing debate about what describes the character of downtown. Is it an idyllic New England community, or is it something sort of in between, a little bit more evolved in some fashion? But it became a lightning rod, this whole issue of the 60-foot theater.
It did.
And people got very upset about it, and we felt we were kind of innocent bystanders in this entire debate. And we eventually said, look, thanks very much, but we would just as soon not even have the overlay zone than then be caught up in something controversial that really wasn't in the interest of the community and something that we wanted to be associated with.
And in the end, and let's say, for example, that you're able to work out a deal with this particular person who's got the particular piece of property, and then you're going to want to build on that property. You will have to come back for some kind of action.
That was our plan from the first place.
It has to be, but in that case, it would be specific to a particular site, and people could say, oh, this is going to be looking like this, and then they could deal with, is this going to somehow upset the balance of the town?
I think most people are more comfortable with something they can visualize.
I would think so. Sure.
And I think in this case particularly, people want to understand how it's going to fit in with the rest of the downtown community. And we're perfectly comfortable with that idea.
And where do the rest of the downtown community ideas, how are they moving forward? Because as you've mentioned, there has been a movement the last couple of years to try to revitalize downtown, to have something more than national stores like the Gap and all the others that are there. So where do we stand with that?
Well, first of all, the subcommittee which I chaired pretty much fulfilled its mandate as of last fall, and we sort of shut down with our recommendations.
Okay.
But we made a couple of recommendations we felt very strongly about. One was to beseech the first selectman to create a sort of permanent role within government. We called it Director of Economic and Community Development, such as Fairfield has right now. And I think some of the things that have changed in downtown Fairfield to the better are related to having somebody in that role. Unfortunately, adding headcount at this point in time with our town government is not likely.
No.
We also asked that a task force be appointed by the first selectman that would sort of pick up from where we left off and try to follow through with actionable steps, and that was created. And third, to ask P&Z to do things within their purview, and some of the things they have done recently, such as outdoor dining and relaxing the bar requirements and the like, and some of the things they're still working on beautification and standardization of some of the things we present in downtown are results of that. The task force, from what I understand, is focusing on one of the ideas that we had, or actually a variant on it, which is perhaps having a downtown economic entity, more of a corporate entity, an authority, or a corporation in that sense. And there are models for that all over the state of Connecticut as well. But with the aegis to be able to bring about a lot of positive but modest changes in downtown. We've talked a lot about parking. We've talked a lot about how we can move some things around so that we can embrace the river, which is so much part of our heritage, and have a river walk and more green space down there. Right. Having an authority, taking some of the pressure off the police department to worry about enforcement of parking regulations, taking care of beautification and sanitation, and a number of those things could all fall under this authority. But one of their primary responsibilities would be to do what Fairfield's been doing, encouraging retail cooperation, retention, things of that sort, having more events, creating a sense of fun and serendipity in downtown, which will have the benefit of greater activity overall.
Well, it's a terrific example of people coming together to make things better, not because somebody's paying them to do it, but because they want to do it and because they're really committed to the towns that they live in. And Jonathan, it's really great. Thanks very much again for coming back in, and hope to see you again soon.
I imagine that could happen.
Yes. There's been a lot of nonsense coming out of the Republican presidential race recently, not least from Governor Rick Perry of Texas, who's vying primarily with Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann for Tea Party support in the primaries. Perry likes to say that the $800 billion stimulus package that Congress passed in 2009 created no jobs. But that's simply not true, and Perry should know better. Either he's ignorant of the facts, or he's deliberately misleading his base, either of which is deeply troubling in someone who wants to be president. Perry got a D in economics in college, and it shows. This chart shows private sector job growth starting from January 2008, the last year of the Bush administration, and continuing through July of this year. It's clear that during the 2008, the country lost more and more jobs each month, culminating in over 2 million more people out of work in the last 3 months of the Bush administration alone. What happened when Obama came into office? Job loss in the private sector stabilized, then dropped dramatically as the stimulus kicked in. By the spring of 2010, the private sector was putting up positive numbers again, with more people back to work. It's clear that the stimulus stopped the free fall and turned the economy around. Another of Perry's crazy ideas is that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme, a monstrous lie. Nothing could be further from the truth. Social Security taxes on current workers support those who are already retired or who are disabled. You pay today, you benefit tomorrow. Exactly the same as when the system was set up during the Great Depression almost 80 years ago. Social Security is an open, transparent, effective, low-cost social insurance program. It keeps millions and millions of seniors out of poverty, and to compare it to a criminal enterprise is itself a monstrous lie. Perry should be ashamed of himself. But of course, Rick Perry isn't the only GOP candidate whose ideas fail the reality test. Michelle Bachmann claims that she can deliver $2 a gallon gas. Ron Paul wants to obliterate the Federal Reserve, most government agencies, and put the country back on the gold standard. All of them think we can create jobs by cutting spending, which obviously puts people out of work and adds to the crisis. And don't get me started about climate change. It wasn't always this way. I remember Republicans who were fiscally conservative, supporters of big business, and strong on defense, but who weren't obvious loonies. Republicans like Jacob Javits, Charles Percy, and Mark Hatfield. It's strange to say, but I almost wish for a return of Richard Nixon, the president who started the Environmental Protection Agency, proposed a living wage subsidy for every American family, and was ready to support a form of universal health care. Nixon today would get booed off the stage at a Republican debate. These are serious times, with enormous problems, both foreign and domestic. And while Obama doesn't seem to have all the answers, the other side at this point doesn't even know what the questions are. It's a scary time indeed. This has been a Stream of Conscience commentary. I'm John Hartwell. Thanks for watching. That's our show for this week. We hope you enjoyed it. If you live in the town served by Cablevision from Norwalk, you can catch our show every Wednesday on Channel 88 at a new time of 6:30 p.m. If you're interested in learning more about progressive political action in Fairfield County, please check out our Democracy for America group. We meet the first Wednesday of the month, 7 to 9 p.m. at the Silver Star Diner in Norwalk. We always welcome new members. Remember, change is possible, and you can make it happen. This has been Stream of Conscience, and I'm your host, John Hartwell. We hope to see you again soon.